Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are going to wander into one of those stories that everyone thinks they already know, but almost no one really does. This is the story of Greek mythology, the grand narrative of the gods and goddesses who shaped the ancient world. You have probably heard pieces of it before. Zeus sitting on his throne on Mount Olympus, hurling thunderbolts at mortals who displease him. Aphrodite rising from the sea foam, embodying all the desire and beauty that the world can contain. Heracles slaying monsters with his bare hands, a hero straddling the line between man and God. The Trojan War, that terrible conflict that burned for 10 years and killed thousands. Persephone disappearing into the underworld, leaving the world to grieve through winter. But tonight, we are going to dive deep into the entire tapestry, from the very beginning to the establishment of the Olympian pantheon. We are going to start not with the gods, not with the heroes, but with what came before them. The darkness, the void, the primordial forces that had to be born and shaped and destroyed before even a god could exist. We are going to see how reality itself was created in the minds of the ancient Greeks, how they imagined the universe coming into being through conflict and passion and terrible choices. Now, if you want, close your eyes and relax and let us begin. Imagine a time before time, a space before space. There is nothing. There is no sky above you, no earth below, no sun casting light or moon reflecting it, no sound, no warmth, no cold, just void. Just emptiness stretching forever in all directions and also nowhere, because there is no direction without space to direct it through. This is where the Greek creation story begins, in that impossible nothing, that pregnant darkness that somehow contains within it all the potential for everything that will ever be. It is a state of being and not being at the same time. The ancient Greeks called this primordial state chaos. Not chaos in the way we use the word today, meaning disorder or madness or something out of control. Chaos was the opposite of order, yes, but it was not random or violent. It was more like infinite potential waiting to be shaped. It was the raw stuff from which reality would be formed, the raw clay before the potter touches it. Think of it like the blank canvas before a painting is begun, before the first brushstroke is made. That canvas has to exist first. The darkness has to come before the light. Otherwise, there is nothing for the light to illuminate, no surface for anything to be seen upon. And in that chaos, something happened, something stirred. A force began to move within the void, like the first thought emerging in a sleeping mind. The Greeks personified this force as chaos itself, but also as other primordial powers that emerged around the same time. There was Gaia, the earth. But not earth as we know it, not the solid ground beneath our feet with its trees and rocks and rivers running through it. This was the principle of earth, the concept of groundedness and materiality itself. This was the force that would become dirt and stone and the very substance of worldliness. There was Uranus, the sky. Again, not the blue expanse you see when you look up on a clear day, not the clouds and the wind and the rain that falls from above. This was the principle of sky, the realm of air and distance and vastness and everything that was not earth. There was Tartarus, which represented the deep abyss below even the earth, the place of darkness beneath darkness, the pit that could go no deeper. And there was Eros, not the childlike Cupid of later imagination, not the chubby baby shooting arrows at people. This was a primordial force of attraction, of things pulling together, of the cosmic impulse toward union and merger, and the joining of separate things into one. These were not yet gods in the way we think of gods. They did not have stories, or have affairs, or punish mortals for offending them. They did not have personalities exactly, not in the way that later gods would. They were more like the fundamental principles that reality itself would be built upon. Imagine them as the first vibrations in the cosmic silence, the first patterns emerging from formlessness, the first yes in response to the void's question. In the beginning, Gaia and Uranus came together. The earth and the sky united. It was not romantic love exactly, but it was union. It was the joining of two principles that had never been joined before. And from their union came forth children, many children. The first of these were the Titans, though they were not the only offspring of that primal coupling. There were 12 Titans, and they were enormous beings, not quite gods, but far more powerful than any mortal could be. They had names and forms and something like personalities, something like desires and fears and hopes. And yet, they were still more elemental than the gods who would come after. They were closer to the raw power of creation itself, still more myth than character. The Titans were Oceanus and Tethys, Hyperion and Thea, Coeus and Phoebe, Cronus and Rhea, and several others whose names echo strangely in our ears. Each one represented something fundamental about the nature of reality. Oceanus was the Titan of the ocean, but also of boundary, of the outer limits of the world, the edge where one thing ended and another began. Hyperion was the Titan of light and illumination. Thea was the Titan of radiance and bright light. Iapetus was the Titan of the west and of mortal life. Cronus was the Titan of harvest and agriculture, of the cycle of growth and death, but also of time itself, of the endless march of moments that eats away at all things. You can see already how the Greeks were thinking about reality, how they were trying to make sense of the world. They did not invent abstract concepts and then hang dramatic stories on them like decorations. Instead, they imagined powerful beings that embodied these concepts, that gave them form and will and agency. The Titans were the fundamental forces of nature, personified as characters who could act and speak. This allowed them to think about how different aspects of reality might work together, or conflict, or succeed one another, or replace one another as time moved on. Rhea, one of the Titans, would become the mother of the first gods, though she herself was a Titan through and through. She married her brother Cronus, and the union of brother and sister was not seen as strange or wrong by the ancient Greeks. In their mythology, before mortal humans existed with all their complex moral codes and taboos, the divine and primordial beings followed different rules. A Titan could marry another Titan if they embodied complementary principles, if their joining made sense in the cosmic order. So Rhea and Cronus came together, and from their union would come children who would change everything about the world. But before we get to them, before we move on to the gods themselves, we need to understand something crucial about the Titans. They were powerful, yes, immensely so, but they were also not the source of their own power. They had been born from Gaia and Uranus. They were the children of a union they did not orchestrate. They were subject to forces they did not control, bound by the will of their parents and by the laws of the cosmos itself. Uranus, their father, grew angry at having so many powerful children running around on the earth and in the sky. He feared their power. He feared being overthrown, as all rulers fear the rise of those who might replace them. And so he pushed them back, pressed them down into the deepest parts of Gaia's body, into Tartarus, that abyssal realm beneath even the earth, a place so far down that it was almost outside of existence. Can you imagine the fury of the Titans, these ancient powers of nature itself, imprisoned in darkness by their own father? Can you imagine them grinding away in the depths, restless and angry, their enormous forms cramped into caverns and pits, their power bound and contained? This is where the Greek sense of drama enters the story. This is where conflict becomes central to everything. These are not safe gods in a nice pantheon, handing out blessings to grateful mortals. These are powerful beings trapped in a nightmare, buried alive beneath the world, waiting and plotting and full of rage. Cronus, one of the most powerful titans, could not bear this imprisonment. He could not accept that his own father had locked him away in darkness while keeping only the sky for himself. With the help of his mother Gaia, who was angry at Uranus for what he had done to her children, for imprisoning his own offspring as if they were monsters to be feared, Cronus gathered his siblings and began to plan their escape and their revenge. They waited in the darkness. They waited in Tartarus, biding their time, gathering their strength, whispering to each other in the shadows about what they would do to their father if they could reach him. And then, one night when Uranus came to lie with Gaia, when he descended from the sky to embrace the earth as he had done so many times before, Cronus and his fellow titans made their move. They attacked with fury and rage. In the violence that followed, a struggle so intense that it shook the very foundations of existence, Cronus overthrew his father. Uranus was defeated. Uranus was defeated and castrated, his blood spilling across the earth and sea, his dominion shattered, his reign brought to an end. From that blood, new beings were born, emerging from the cosmic wound. The giants emerged, angry and violent and hungry for revenge against the gods who would later replace the titans. The Erinyes or Furies emerged, beings of vengeance and justice and righteous anger, their purpose forever tied to the punishment of those who committed heinous crimes. And in the foam of the sea, where his blood mixed with water, something beautiful was born. Aphrodite herself was born, or rather, she emerged into full consciousness and power. She would embody beauty and desire and the force of attraction that could make even gods do foolish things. Cronus took control of the cosmos. He freed his siblings from Tartarus, releasing them from their imprisonment. And for a time, they ruled the universe together. This age of the Titans is often called the Golden Age in Greek mythology, a term borrowed perhaps from Hesiod's description of an age of peace and plenty. It was a time of relative peace, or at least less violence than what came before, less cosmic warfare, less primordial fury tearing at the fabric of reality. The Titans established order where chaos had reigned. They gave shape to reality, form to the formless, meaning to the void. Cronus took the throne as king of the gods and Titans, and Rhea stood beside him as queen. For a while, it seemed like this order might last forever, that the Titans would rule unchallenged for all eternity. The universe had found its rulers at last. The wild energies of chaos had been channeled into a hierarchy, a kingdom with king and queen and subjects, wit, its rules and laws and a structure that made sense. But Uranus, before his death, before he was cast down and broken, had spoken a curse. As his blood spilled and his consciousness began to fade from the world, he told Cronus that he would be overthrown by one of his own children, just as Cronus had overthrown him. This is the curse of succession, the price of overthrowing your father, the knowledge that your children will do to you what you have done to yours. The curse echoed in Cronus's mind like a bell that could not stop ringing. It haunted him. It poisoned his reign with fear and paranoia. And so when his children began to be born, when Rhea gave him sons and daughters, Cronus did something terrible. He swallowed them. One by one, as each child was born from his wife, Cronus reached down and swallowed them whole, consuming them into his own body, believing that if his children did not exist in any form, if they were trapped inside him, they could not overthrow him. Can you imagine Rhea's horror? Can you imagine the anguish and the rage of giving birth to a child, only to watch your own husband consume it before your eyes, to know that your baby is now inside him, trapped and helpless? Can you imagine doing this over and over again, child after child, knowing each time that this was what would happen, and being unable to stop it? Rhea could not bear this any longer. She could not bear the pain and the horror and the futility of giving birth only to watch her children disappear into her husband's belly. When she was about to give birth to her sixth child, she made a desperate plan. She fled from Cronus, fled from Mount Othrys, fled to the island of Crete, and there, in a hidden cave far from her husband's reach, she gave birth in secret. The child was Zeus. To hide him from Cronus, to protect him from the fate of his siblings, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, wrapped it as if it were a newborn baby, wrapped it so carefully that in the dim light it looked exactly like an infant. She presented this stone bundle to Cronus and watched his face as he reached for it, as he assumed what she had brought him. Without looking closely, without examining his gift, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing it was his son, believing that he had successfully imprisoned one more child inside himself. And so Zeus was hidden away, his location unknown to his father, his existence kept secret. He was nursed by nymphs, fed by a magical goat called Amalthea, protected by armed warriors called the Curetes, who banged their shields and spears to drown out any sound the baby might make. As Zeus grew in secret, learning his power in the isolated forests and mountains of Crete, becoming stronger and smarter with every passing day, the stage was being set for the greatest war the universe had ever seen. The Titans did not know it yet that they were doomed. Cronus did not know it yet that his days as king were numbered. But the curse of Uranus was already in motion. The son who would overthrow the father was growing stronger with every passing day, growing in secret, growing in hiding, preparing himself for the moment when he would strike. This is the moment where the story shifts fundamentally. This is where we move from the age of Titans to the age of gods. But the transition was not smooth or peaceful or quick. It was violent and terrible and raged across the heavens for 10 long years. The war that was about to begin would shake the very foundations of the cosmos, would remake reality itself. The gods against the Titans, the new against the old, the future against the past, the order that would be against the order that had been. When Zeus reached manhood, when he had grown strong enough and learned enough about the universe and about power, he returned from his hiding place on Crete. He came down from the mountains and made his way to his mother Rhea, and together they executed their plan. He gathered his siblings, the brothers and sisters that Cronus had swallowed, but who still lived inside the god's stomach, preserved in some timeless state, unchanged and waiting. With the help of a sorceress, with the help of Metis, the titaness of wisdom and craft, they made a potion. Zeus gave this potion to his father, and Cronus, unsuspecting, drank it. The magic worked. Cronus began to vomit. He convulsed and heaved, and out of his mouth came Zeus's siblings, fully grown and powerful. First came Hestia, goddess of the hearth, then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, then Hera, who would become Zeus's wife, then Hades and Poseidon, who would rule the underworld and the sea. They emerged from their father's body like heroes from an egg, alive and furious and ready for war. With the help of the Titans who had opposed Cronus, particularly the Titans Themis, and others who saw Zeus as the lesser evil, Zeus began his open revolt against his father. The war that followed was called the Titanomachy, which means literally the Battle of the Titans, and it was a conflict of cosmic proportions, unlike anything that had come before or would come after. Imagine two groups of massive beings, each one embodying a different principle of reality, clashing in the heavens with such fury that the earth itself convulsed. Imagine the earth shaking beneath the feet of mortals who cowered in caves and wondered if the world was ending. Imagine lightning striking from above, thunder row, ling across the sky, and the very structure of the universe straining and groaning under the weight of their combat. The Titans fought from their stronghold on Mount Othrys, their ancient fortress, their seat of power. The gods fought from Mount Olympus, a new stronghold that they had taken or built or claimed as their own. Between them lay the mortal world, caught in the crossfire of divine warfare, innocent and small and terrified. Cronus was a formidable opponent. He had ruled the cosmos for ages upon ages. He understood how power worked, how to use it, how to keep it. He had given shape to the world. But Zeus had something Cronus did not have in the same measure. Zeus had ambition burning in his chest like a fire that could not be extinguished. Zeus had hunger for power, for dominion, for the throne. And Zeus had allies that his father had not anticipated. The gods sided with Zeus, the younger gods, his brothers and sisters who had been freed from their father's belly. Poseidon stood with him, the god of the sea and earthquakes, armed with his trident, which he could use to shake the earth or calm the wildest storms. Hades stood with him, god of the underworld and the dead, though his realm was distant from the main battle, and he played a less visible role in the conflict. Hera stood with him, beautiful and fierce and proud, though she had no love for him yet, would not be his wife until after the war was won. Demeter stood with him, goddess of the harvest and the cycles of growth and death, and their aunts and uncles, the Titans who opposed Cronus, fought on their side as well, these beings who saw the younger gods as preferable to the reign of the Titan king. The war lasted for 10 long years. Year after year passed with no clear victor, no end in sight. Neither side could gain the upper hand decisively enough to win. The Titans were old and powerful and experienced in war, but the younger gods were fierce and driven and hungry for victory. The sky god Hyperion fought against Zeus with all his strength and was defeated and cast down. The light-bearer Iapetus fell to the combined might of the younger gods. Themis and Chaos fought on Zeus's side, turning the balance bit by bit. But still the war went on, year after year, blow after blow, the two sides locked in a terrible stalemate. Then Zeus made a crucial decision, a stroke of genius that would tip the balance forever. He journeyed to Tartarus, that deep abyss where terrible beings dwelt, where the worst of creation was imprisoned, and he freed the 100-handed giants called the Hecatoncheires and the one-eyed Cyclopes who had been imprisoned there since the earliest days of creation. These creatures owed nothing to Cronus. They had no loyalty to the Titans. But they did have loyalty to Gaia, the earth goddess and mother of all, and Gaia had spoken on behalf of Zeus, had asked them to aid her grandson. The 100-handed giants joined the fight, and their arrival changed everything in an instant. They possessed enormous strength and strange, powerful magic that was older than the magic of the Titans. The Cyclopes, meanwhile, forged for Zeus the Master Bolt, the Thunderbolt that would become his most famous weapon and symbol. Lightning carved from the very essence of divinity itself, shaped by divine hands in divine workshops, a weapon so powerful that nothing could withstand it. With these allies on his side, with the 100-handed ones, and the Cyclopes and the Titans who opposed his father, Zeus pressed his attack on Cronus with renewed fury. The war reached its climax on the field of battle, in that terrible place where gods and Titans clashed. Cronus and Zeus faced each other directly, king and prince, father and son. Oct in combat, the king of the Titans and the prince of the gods, the old order and the new. In the end, it was the thunderbolt that decided it all. Zeus threw the master bolt with all his strength, and it flew through the air like a divine bird. Cronus was struck, was hit directly, was shattered by the force of it. The Titan king fell from his throne and was cast into Tartarus, bound in chains forged by the Hecatoncheires themselves, imprisoned in the very same place he had imprisoned them. One by one, the remaining Titans were defeated and imprisoned, their power broken, their reign ended. The war was over. The age of the Titans had ended. The age of the gods had begun. But the victory was not without cost. The earth had been scarred by the war, torn and broken in places. Mountains had been torn down and rebuilt in different shapes. The sea had been churned and its waters had risen and fallen. The sky itself showed the marks of battle, and some say that the stars themselves were shaken in their courses. And many beings had been lost, creatures who would never be seen again. The cosmos had been remade, shaped by the hands of gods rather than titans. Order had been restored, but it was a different kind of order than Cronus's rule had been. A new order with new rulers and new rules. Now Zeus stood at the top of everything. He sat on Mount Olympus and surveyed the world he had won through war and cunning. But being king of the gods meant that decisions had to be made. Important decisions about how the universe would be organized and who would rule what. Power needed to be distributed among the worthy. This is where we get the 12 Olympians, the gods who would become the most famous in Greek mythology, the pantheon that would shape how people understood the divine for thousands of years. These were not the only gods the Greeks believed in, but the 12 were the major players, the ones with the most power and the most interesting stories. Zeus was the king of all, holding the sky and weather in his hands, god of thunder and justice, though his justice was complicated and often served his own interests as much as it did anyone else's. Hera was his wife, queen of the gods and goddess of marriage and family, though their union was tumultuous and filled with conflict and misery. Poseidon ruled the seas with his trident, tempestuous and vengeful, whom ancient sailors honoured with offerings before setting sail, hoping for safe passage. Hades ruled the underworld and the realm of the dead, neither good nor evil, simply the lord of the place. Everyone eventually went when their time came. Athena was born from Zeus's head, fully grown and armed, fully formed as goddess of wisdom and strategy, representing the intellectual side of war. Farah, she became patron goddess of Athens, destined to become the center of Greek civilization. Ares represented war in its destructive, brutal aspect, cruel where Athena was strategic. Apollo, Zeus's son, was god of music and poetry and prophecy, beautiful and bright, driving the sun across the sky each day in a golden chariot. Artemis was his twin, goddess of the hunt and moon, fierce and independent, having sworn to remain a virgin forever. Aphrodite was goddess of love and beauty, born from Uranus's blood when he was defeated, representing the irresistible power of attraction and desire. Hermes was god of travelers and merchants and thieves and tricksters, swift and clever, serving as messenger between gods and humans, carrying his caduceus staff. Hephaestus was the divine blacksmith, the only Olympian depicted as physically flawed or imperfect, yet he forged the most beautiful and powerful weapons. Demeter was goddess of harvest and agriculture, whose relationship with her daughter Persephone explained why the earth becomes barren in winter. Hestia was goddess of the hearth and home, quiet and steady and essential, the center around which families gathered. These 12 gods would dominate Greek religious life for thousands of years, worshipped and feared and appeased by mortals who understood that the divine could be both beautiful and terrible. But the gods did not simply sit on Mount Olympus and ignore the mortal world below. They came down to that world. They walked among humans. They took lovers, fathered children, meddled in the affairs of mortals in ways that seemed arbitrary and cruel from the perspective of those caught in their schemes. This is where the stories begin to shift from pure cosmology, from the grand clash of titans and the establishment of order, into something more intimate and more dramatic. This is where the individual stories emerge, where we move from what happened to the universe into what happened to people. The age that opened after the Titan War was sometimes called the heroic age by the Greeks, though that name carried more irony than inspiration. These were the centuries when the greatest heroes were born, when gods walked freely among mortals, and the line between the two groups seemed thinner and more permeable than it would ever be again. The heroes of this age were not gods, but they were not entirely human either. Most of them had one parent who was divine and one who was mortal, making them demigods caught between two worlds, stronger and more capable than any normal human, but not quite able to reach the full power of divinity. They could die, and many did. They could suffer pain and hunger and despair, but they could also do things that seemed impossible, achieve feats that would be remembered and sung about for thousands of years. These heroes were the first celebrities of human civilization in a way, figures whose names would be spoken with reverence and whose stories would be told and retold until the original facts became buried under layers of embellishment and myth. The first great hero we know of in Greek mythology is Perseus. He was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Danae, and his story begins not with his birth, but with a prophecy of death. His grandfather, the king of a city called Argos, was told by an oracle that he would be killed by his own grandson. This is a common pattern in Greek mythology, this fear of prophecy, this certainty that the future is fixed and terrible. The king decided to prevent the birth of any grandson by locking his daughter Danae away in a bronze tower, a place where no man could reach her. But Zeus, being Zeus, found a way. He transformed himself into a shower of gold and flooded down through the tower's roof. And the result was that Danae became pregnant. When Perseus was born, the king put both mother and child into a wooden chest and threw them into the sea, hoping they would drown. They did not drown. The chest washed ashore on an island, where a fisherman found them and took them to the king of that island, who fell in love with Danae and raised Perseus as his own. As Perseus grew, the king became tired of the boy and decided to get rid of him by sending him on an impossible quest. He told Perseus to bring back the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, monsters with snakes for hair, whose gaze could turn anyone who looked at them to stone. She was the only one of the 3 who was mortal, but she was still nearly impossible to kill. The king assumed that Perseus would die trying, that he would look at Medusa and be turned to stone like so many others before him. But Perseus had something that the other heroes did not have. He had help. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, appeared to him and gave him advice and a polished shield that could serve as a mirror. Hermes, the god of travelers and tricksters, gave him winged sandals that would let him fly and an adamantine sickle that could cut through anything. With these gifts, Perseus went on his quest. He found Medusa in a dark cave, and instead of looking at her directly, he looked at her reflection in the shield. Using the reflection as his guide, he swung the adamantine sickle and cut off her head. He put the head into a bag, and flew away on the winged sandals. On his flight home, he rescued a princess named Andromeda who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster, and he married her. When he returned home with Medusa's head, he walked into the hall where the king who had sent him on the quest was feasting, and he held up the head. The king and his entire court were turned to stone by its gaze. The prophecy was fulfilled. The grandson had killed the grandfather, though not with his own hands, but with the head of a monster. Perseus became king of the city and lived a long life, and eventually he was placed in the sky as a constellation. The greatest hero of all in Greek mythology is Heracles, though you might know him by his Roman name, Hercules. His story is one of the most complex and tragic in all of mythology, because Heracles was not born to be a hero. He was born to be a servant of his enemies. Heracles was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene, but he was hated by Hera from the moment of his birth. Hera was the queen of the gods and the wife of Zeus, and she was jealous of Zeus's affairs with mortal women. She decided that Heracles would be her instrument of suffering. Even as a baby, Heracles was marked for tragedy. Hera sent 2 giant serpents into the cradle where the infant Heracles slept, intending to strangle him in the night. The baby woke, and instead of dying, he grabbed the serpents with his bare hands and crushed them. This was the first sign that he was different, that he was blessed or cursed with a strength that had no equal in the world. As Heracles grew, he received training in weapons and music and all the things that a prince would learn. He became a warrior of incredible prowess. He fell in love with a woman named Megara and married her. For a time it seemed like he might have a normal life, like he might escape the fate that Hera had in store for him. Then Hera drove him mad. She sent a fit of madness upon him so that he lost his mind completely, and in his madness, he killed his own wife and children. When he came back to himself and realized what he had done, he was broken by grief and guilt. He sought atonement. He went to the oracle at Delphi to ask how he could make amends for such a terrible crime. The oracle told him that he must serve a mortal king named Eurystheus and perform whatever labors the king demanded of him. It was a humiliation for a hero to serve a lesser mortal, but Heracles accepted it. For years, he performed the 12 labors that Eurystheus demanded of him. He killed the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons, so he strangled it with his bare hands. He captured the golden hind of Artemis, a deer so sacred that even touching it would bring divine punishment. He defeated the Erymanthian boar. He cleaned the Augean stables in a single day by diverting a river through them. He captured the Ceryneian hind. He defeated the Stymphalian birds. He captured the Cretan bull. He obtained the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a warrior woman and her people. He captured Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades, and brought it back from the underworld itself. Each labor was designed to be impossible, to be a death sentence. But Heracles had a quality that no other hero possessed. He had absolute determination. He did not give up. He did not accept defeat. Even when faced with a monster that seemed unbeatable, even when wounded and exhausted, he kept fighting until he won. He was the embodiment of human willpower pushed to its absolute limit. When he finally completed all 12 labors, he was freed from his servitude. But he continued on adventures, continued fighting monsters and villains, continued trying to do good in the world, even though goodness seemed to bring him nothing but pain. Eventually, he married a woman named Deianira, and they were happy for a time. But destiny caught up with him. A centaur poisoned Deianira, who then accidentally poisoned Heracles with the blood of the centaur. As he lay dying, consumed by the poison that burned through his body, he climbed onto a funeral pyre and set himself on fire, choosing to die with dignity rather than suffer any longer. When A died, the gods took pity on him. They brought him to Mount Olympus and made him immortal, which is something that rarely happened to mortals. Heracles became the only one of the great heroes to achieve full godhood in the end. Theseus was another of the great heroes, the founder and hero of Athens. His story is less about individual labors and more about his role in shaping civilization and establishing order. He was the son of Aegeus, a king of Athens, and he grew up in a distant city, unaware of his parentage. When he came of age, he traveled to Athens to meet his father, and he was recognized by his father as his son. But there was a terrible problem in Athens. The city was being forced to send tributes to the island of Crete, tributes that consisted of 14 young Athenians who would be sent into a labyrinth and sacrificed to the Minotaur, a creature that was half man and half bull, the result of a curse placed on the Queen of Crete for her unnatural desires. This sacrifice happened every 7 or 9 years, and it was draining the city of its youth and its hope. Theseus volunteered to go to Crete as part of the tribute, intending to face the Minotaur and kill it, to free Athens from this horrible obligation. When he arrived in Crete, he met Ariadne, the daughter of the king, and she fell in love with him immediately. She gave him a thread to unwind as he walked through the labyrinth, so that he could find his way back out after killing the Minotaur. He entered the maze, followed the path deeper and deeper into its twisting passages until he found the creature in its lair, and he defeated the Minotaur in hand-to-hand combat, wrestling with it in the darkness. He followed the thread back out of the labyrinth, finding his way through the confusion of passages and dead ends. He escaped with Ariadne and the other Athenian youths. He sailed back to Athens, though the story gets complicated here, with Ariadne being abandoned on an island, and eventually becoming the wife of the god Dionysus. When Theseus arrived back in Athens, he should have been celebrated as a hero, should have been welcomed with parades and feasts. But he forgot something crucial. His father, Aegeus, had told him that if he returned victorious, he should change the sails of his ship from black to white, to signal that he was alive and well. Theseus forgot. When King Aegeus saw a ship approaching with black sails, he assumed his son was dead. He jumped off a cliff into the sea and died. Theseus became king of Athens in place of his father, and he went on to be a just and wise ruler, unifying the kingdom and Este, abolishing it as a great power. Jason and the Argonauts represent a different kind of heroic quest, one based more on adventure and exploration than on conquest or atonement. Jason's story is about a band of heroes working together rather than about a single champion overcoming trials. Jason was the son of a deposed king, and he was promised his kingdom back if he could retrieve the golden fleece from a far-off land called Colchis. The golden fleece was the hide of a golden ram that had been sacrificed to the gods, a token of divine favor and power. It was guarded by a dragon that never slept, a guardian placed there specifically to keep the fleece from being taken. Jason gathered a crew of the greatest heroes of his age. He recruited Heracles, who was already famous for his strength. He recruited Orpheus, the musician and poet, whose song could move even the gods to tears. He recruited the Dioscuri, twin brothers, who were sons of Zeus and known for their skill in combat and their loyalty to each other. He recruited Atalanta, one of the few women in this world of male heroes, a huntress who could outrun nearly anyone, and whose presence among the crew caused some tension. He recruited many others whose names and stories have survived through the centuries, and together they set sail on a ship called the Argo, which is why they became known as the Argonauts. Their voyage was a series of encounters with magical beings and dangerous lands that tested their courage and their unity. They encountered the Harpies, bird women who stole food and left only stench behind, and they had to fight to keep themselves alive. They encountered the Symplegades, two rocks that crashed together and were said to crush any ship that passed between them. Jason sailed between them at just the right moment, and they became fixed, no longer able to move. When the Argonauts reached Colchis, Jason had to complete a series of trials set by the king of that land. He had to plough a field with fire-breathing oxen. He had to plant dragon's teeth that would grow into armed soldiers. He had to retrieve the fleece from the dragon. The king's daughter, Medea, was a sorceress with power beyond imagination, and she fell in love with Jason. She used her magic to help him complete these trials. She put the dragon to sleep so that Jason could take the fleece. She created a solution that allowed him to defeat the soldiers that grew from the dragon's teeth. Jason and Medea fled Colchis together, returning to Greece with the golden fleece. But Medea's help came at a cost. She had betrayed her own father and brother to aid Jason. She would eventually become a tragic figure in the mythology, and her story with Jason would end in betrayal and sorrow, as Jason abandoned her for a political marriage. The Trojan War is the central event of Greek mythology, the story that ties together dozens of heroes and encompasses the entire heroic age in one great and terrible conflict. It began because of a beauty contest held on Mount Olympus. The goddess Eris, whose name meant discord and strife, threw a golden apple into a feast of the gods. The apple was inscribed with the words, for the most beautiful. 3 goddesses wanted the apple. Hera wanted it because she was the queen of the gods and embodied power. Athena wanted it because she was wise and strong and represented excellence in all forms. Aphrodite wanted it because she was the embodiment of beauty itself and of desire. Zeus did not want to judge between them because he knew that no matter who he chose, he would make 2 enemies of the remaining goddesses. So he sent them to a mortal man named Paris to judge the contest. Paris was a Trojan prince, the son of King Priam of Troy. When the 3 goddesses appeared before him, each of them offered him something if he would choose her. Hera offered him power and dominion over great kingdoms. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in battle. Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite and beauty. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, and she was the wife of a Greek king named Menelaus. Aphrodite arranged for Paris to meet Helen, and they fell in love. They ran away together to Troy. Menelaus was furious at this betrayal. He called upon his brother Agamemnon, who was the most powerful of the Greek kings, to help him get Helen back. Agamemnon called upon all the other Greek kings to unite against Troy. Dozens of heroes answered the call. Achilles, the greatest warrior of all the Greeks, came despite a prophecy that he would either live a long life in obscurity or a short life of great glory. He chose glory. Heracles did not come because he had already died by this time. Ajax came, a giant of a man with incredible strength. Odysseus came, known for his cunning rather than his strength. Diomedes came. Nestor came, an old man, but still respected for his wisdom. Many others came as well. They assembled at the port of Aulis, where they waited for a wind that would carry them to Troy. But the wind did not come. Agamemnon had offended the goddess Artemis, and she held the wind in her grasp as punishment. The only way to appease her was to sacrifice Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon agonized over this choice, but in the end, he agreed to the sacrifice. Some versions say that Iphigenia was killed. Others say that Artemis substituted a deer for the girl at the last moment and spirited her away to safety. Either way, the sacrifice appeased the goddess, and the wind came. The Greek fleet set sail for Troy. They would fight at Troy for 10 long years before any of them would return home. The Trojan War is so vast and so complex that it could fill entire books. There are stories of individual duels and competitions, of heroes testing themselves against each other. Achilles and Hector, the greatest warrior of each side, fought while the armies watched from a distance. When Hector fell, killed by Achilles' spear, the Greeks seemed poised for victory, but Achilles was killed soon after, struck down by an arrow to his heel, the only place on his body where he could be mortally wounded, a vulnerability that made him human despite his near-divine status. Ajax and Odysseus fought over Achilles' armor, arguing about who was the better warrior and more deserving of the prize. Odysseus won the contest through clever arguing rather than through strength, and Ajax, humiliated, took his own life. The war dragged on year after year with no clear end in sight. Neither the Greeks nor the Trojans seemed able to deliver the final blow that would break the other side's will. The Greeks lost many of their greatest warriors to disease and battle. The Trojans, behind their great walls, seemed impossible to defeat. Then Odysseus, the master of cunning and strategy, came up with a plan. The Greeks would build a giant wooden horse and present it as a gift to the Trojans. The Trojans, tired of the war and thinking the Greeks were leaving to go home, would accept the horse and bring it into their city. The Greeks would hide inside the horse, and at night they would climb out and open the gates of Troy, allowing their army to enter. When the horse appeared outside Troy's walls, many of the Trojans argued about what to do. A priest named Laocoon warned them that it was a trap. He said, "I fear the Greeks even when they bear gifts." But his warnings went unheeded. Poseidon, angry at Laocoon for his presumption, sent 2 serpents to kill him and his children. The Trojans brought the horse inside their walls. That night, the Greeks emerged from the horse. They opened the gates. The Greek army poured into the city. The Trojans fought desperately to defend their homes, but they were surrounded and overwhelmed. King Priam was killed. Hector's son was thrown from the walls. The city was put to the torch. Troy, one of the greatest cities in the ancient world, was destroyed utterly. Helen was recovered by Menelaus, though he hesitated for a moment when he saw how beautiful she still was, wondering if the war had been worth it after all. After 10 years of war, thousands dead on both sides, the Greeks had won. But the cost was so high that the victory felt hollow to many of them. The fall of Troy did not mark the end of the Trojan War stories, though. It marked the beginning of a new set of stories about the Greeks struggling to get home. The gods had been angered by the brutality of the sack of Troy, by the way the Greeks had desecrated temples and killed suppliants at altars. Many Greek heroes encountered troubles on their voyages back to Greece. Some died at sea. Some were shipwrecked on distant islands. Some took years to return home. The most famous of these return stories is that of Odysseus. Odysseus had been at Troy for 10 years, but his return journey would take another 10 years, a decade filled with dangers and obstacles and supernatural encounters. He encountered monsters and gods and magical beings. He was trapped on the island of the Cyclops, a one-eyed giant named Polyphemus, who ate some of Odysseus's men in front of their horrified companions. Odysseus blinded the Cyclops by driving a heated stake through his eye, but this angered Poseidon, god of the sea, because Polyphemus was Poseidon's son. Poseidon then tormented Odysseus's journey, sending storms and obstacles to slow his return home. Odysseus encountered Circe, a sorceress who turned his men into pigs with a wave of her hand. He had to rescue them and negotiate with her. He heard the song of the sirens, creatures whose beauty and music could lure sailors to their doom on the rocks, and he had to tie himself to the mast of his ship so he would not be seduced by their call. He had to sail between Scylla and Charybdis, 2 monsters on either side of a narrow strait, where Charybdis would suck entire ships down into the sea. He lost more men to these encounters. When he finally reached his home in Ithaca, he found that his wife Penelope was besieged by suitors who assumed that Odysseus was dead and wanted to marry her and take his throne. Odysseus had to disguise himself as a beggar and assess the situation carefully. He eventually revealed himself and, with the help of his son Telemachus and the guidance of the goddess Athena, he killed all the suitors who had invaded his house. He was reunited with his wife and son. After decades away from home, after losing almost all of his men, after facing monsters and gods and nearly impossible odds, Odysseus had finally returned to where he belonged. His story has become the archetype for the journey narrative, the tale of a man trying to get home against impossible odds.